Что было брошено? Good evening, and no matter when you happen to be listening to this, it is always evening. And welcome to Tom's Terror Trove, a collection of classic works of horror fiction and, latterly, an exploration of the literary roots of characters, themes and tropes from the Project Moon series of games. I am Thomas Barker, a voice actor from New Zealand who, suddenly, one day, noticed that my recording of Hell's Screen was attracting attention from a different audience than expected, and being interested in both video games and books, I know, can you even imagine, I decided to depart from the narrow path of narration and get lost in the selva oscura of Limbus Company. This week on the programme, Rodion, that statuesque wielder of wood-chopping weapons. We're going to discuss mind, body and spirit, the splitting of a character, both figuratively and literally, skip blithely through the advent of psychological realism in novels in the middle of the 19th century, alight briefly on tarot cards and Kabbalah, and maybe even take a look at hookers with a heart of gold. So, let's explore the sprawling environs of the city together, and the realms and realities beyond, and learn a couple of things. I know I always do, and having the opportunity to read the books that these characters have emerged from, and reading all the amazing theories and connections made and expounded upon in the comments to these videos. Thank you very much. Conversely, I know I can be a bit slow in catching on in other areas. I see you at the back of the classroom trying to sneak your memes in here. Well, look, I'm practically an olden man at this point, and I tell you, I can't keep up, though I promise I will always try. This channel will never be knowingly relevant. So, impress your friends, bore your enemies, or vice versa, with your newfound knowledge, and let's get into it. In examining the character of Rodion, Splitter and Paradox, I relied on a couple of sources to try and knit together a composite picture of her that I hope will inform and deepen our appreciation of the manifestation in Limbus Company. Or at least we'll dig up some new trivia, or at worst, well, remember what I said earlier about boring your enemies. First source, Crime and Punishment, Natch, the novel itself, or Prestупление и наказание in the original. And it is here that we will come to our first little stumbling block. From what I understand, naказание translates pretty acceptably as punishment, but prestупление is more accurately a kind of stepping across or stepping over. According to a breakdown I read, stupech is to take a step, stuplение makes it into a noun, and prie is an idea of across something. So prestупление means stepping across. As we will come to see, the idea of transgression, overstepping, deliberate or unconscious, is one that resonates very strongly with a Raskolnikov. Secondly, a couple of really interesting journal articles on artistic failure, dreams and motives, all directly relating to Crime and Punishment. And lastly, since I didn't actually touch on these topics in the Grigor episode, although I very much wanted to, there's always a lot of stuff left on the cutting room floor, I dug up 2 slim volumes I had in a cupboard somewhere. Tarot, a new handbook for the apprentice, and Kabbalah, Tradition of Hidden Knowledge. As always, references and links are in the description of this episode. Crime and Punishment was published in 1866, in the wake of its author, Fyodor Dostoevsky, having experienced his own punishment in the form of 4 years exile and hard labor in Siberia. Addicted to gambling, experiencing regular epileptic fits, and supporting his brother's family as well as his own, he produced what is often cited as one of the greatest works of world literature. The plot is as follows. Raskolnikov is the pride and hope of his family, but he has broken off his studies and is living the life of a pauper in St. Petersburg. The only rational way out, it appears to him, is to murder Alyobova Ivanovna, a disagreeable old pawnbroker whose existence, he has decided, is pointless. Conceived while Dostoevsky was a convict in Siberia and reflecting the painful process of his own reassessment of radical ideas, Crime and Punishment is a classic on a mighty scale. At once a thriller, a profound exploration of the psychology of a man who becomes a killer and has to live with his act, and a searching investigation of the social, political, and existential ideas of the Tsarist 1860s. So, how does it inform us regarding Rodion in Limbus Company? Why read books, or even this book? I tend to take a maximalist position on these topics. Let's be cultural omnivores, magpies. I also think it's worthwhile to get immersed in a powerful, sustained narrative from time to time, which Crime and Punishment most certainly is, and in a different way to long-form narrative and strategic games like Limbus Company. I urge you to read the book if you haven't done so and you can find the time, even if it takes a while. I'll freely admit that my powers of concentration are not what they once were, but like any ability, these can be strengthened through use. The rewards, if you let yourself be swept along by the storytelling, the characters, the horror, squalor, dashes of humour, very few and far between, but when they come in they are surprising and philosophizing. As I said, maximalist. It's like Shakespeare in that sense. All of life is in there, and hey, a smattering of pretension and discovery is not such a bad thing, at least I don't think so. I mean, I have to say that because it's something I'm often accused of. Total sued here, and I'm not afraid to admit it. It's also just an awesome thriller, by the way, in the Columbo sense. The killer is identified from the get-go, and the thrill is in watching the net slowly tighten. In fact, the character of Columbo was pretty directly inspired by the detective in Crime and Punishment, Porphyry. Of course, the point of all my pontificating, and the point of going back to the source material at all, is to see what it might tell us about our beloved gacha game. I've been going back and forth on this recently. The desire to explain and understand, whatever that might mean, different things to different people, I suspect, versus the need to just experience a text. And when I say text, I mean anything that can be interpreted or read. A painting, a game, a movie, a book, etc. Contrast this with what Hugh Mercer Kirtler says in The Artistic Failure of Crime and Punishment. Those who approach novels intent upon finding a message run the risk of hammering poetry into a sheet by reducing it to philosophy. But novels, if they are any good, are not philosophical treatises. And this sort of reduction glosses over fundamental differences of scope and method. The poem, and he's talking about the novel in this sense, poetry being a kind of experiential art, presents images that must be apprehended in their full presentational immediacy, in that rapt, intransitive attention that Eliseo Vivas described as the aesthetic moment. The term aesthetic refers to the robust tone, texture, or felt quality of experience that artists seek to convey before reflection has gone to work on it, and invariably altered it. And great novels are, above all else, works of art in which the aesthetic moments are of the essence. What this means is that, initially at any rate, one does not attempt to understand a poem or novel. One tries to appreciate it, to open oneself up to it in order to hear the poet speak with his many voices. I feel like the aesthetic moment is another pretty good way of describing something that is, as we tend to say, peak. Oh wait, I'm sorry, actually, checks notes, shuffle. Peem. Yet another perspective is proffered, however, by Limbus Company itself. Poets are not sometimes just philosophers, but scientists. I'd like to explore this further when I get to Yi-sang, as there was some dialogue in The Unchanging, particularly in Faust's comparison of herself with the S-Corp native. This so-called analysis and interpretation of stars and clouds might be an area Yi-sang is more familiar with. He's a researcher like me, but we're not quite the same. In reading Crime and Punishment, I actually struggled when trying to look for traces of the fun-loving, teasingly supportive Rodion of Limbus Company. If, however, one looks at Limbus's Rodia as embodying a particular facet of the character, a glimpse through a prism or even a mirror, yeah, we're getting to you, Yi-sang, and the different ways an author can work out an idea, a personality even, and split it up and reflect it via several external characters, things may become a little clearer. As Grigor in the previous episode personified a sort of suffering, rebirth, and redemption narrative, Rodion Raskolnikov, psychologically at least, is a split personality. And through the novel's 650 or so pages, this psychology is worked out through and reflected in the personalities of Svidrigaïlov, the sensualist, who I think our Roger in LC rather takes after with her love of food and money. I'm simplifying, of course. Luzin, the cruelly logical, and Sonya, the spiritually pure. Now, this character is, of course, present in the game, though gender-swapped and playing a more active and revolutionary role than Sonya does in the novel. LC Rodion also shares her compassion and supportive nature. So, mind, body, and spirit. The rule of three strikes again, baby. According to most interpretations of crime and punishment, the struggle within Raskolnikov becomes physical external action as he wavers between Svidrigaïlov, the epitome of self-willed evil, and Sonya, the epitome of self-sacrifice and spiritual goodness. We see this in the game too, as Rodya vacillates between her fun-loving self and a kind of colder insecurity. Although the coldness and the mind aspect, the analytical aspect, is more represented by the character of Luzin, the fiancée of Rodion in the book's sister Dunya. Dr. Frederick Wortham, in his The Show of Violence, 1944, makes a useful distinction between reason and motive. Reason is the conscious explanation a man makes for himself or an outsider before, during, and after a deed. Motive is the real driving force, which is at least partly unconscious, and which can be understood only as part of a continuing and developing process. Now, it's interesting to think about Rodya in the game's relationship with Sonya and her frustration at the perceived inaction of the Yurodivia syndicate. Using this distinction, we may say that within Raskolnikov there are three motives, which, during the course of the narrative, rise to the surface of his consciousness and become reasons for his crime. The murder of the pawnbroker, of course. The first of these, his wish to rob and murder the old pawnbroker that he may administer justice by distributing her ill-gotten riches to the more deserving poor, or more probably that he may finance the education that is to make him a benefactor of mankind, is motive only in that it is rooted in Raskolnikov's dominating characteristic, the egoistic pride that makes him want to play God. Side note, it was hilarious to me, anyway, to see the name Frederick Wortham quoted in this journal article, as I'd hitherto only been aware of him as the pearl-clutching author of Seduction of the Innocent, which was a 50s book that basically blamed comic books, I think EC Comics in particular was one of his targets, for all the ills of society, absolutely corrupting children. It's a shame that that's kind of become his legacy, at least in popular culture, because he was also engaged in a lot of really noble enterprises, but this kind of paternalistic alarmism has sort of become more of his legacy, at least for, people interested in the history of comics. Per the wiki, Rodya, having been afforded few luxuries in her youth, she highly values access to food, free time, and relaxation. This is often displayed as an unabashed love for eating and money. Rodion is open about a belief that wealth is the sole deciding factor in one's quality of life, and is determined to take advantage of everything she's offered as an employee of Limbus Company, without shame. There are certain benefactors in the book, and I must admit I did spend some time thinking, geez, Rodion doesn't deserve friends like these. But these are some big points of cleavage, and no, I'm not making a bad pun here, but maybe that was a poorly chosen word to use, between the character in the game and the character in the book. These ideas also reflect Rodya's disillusionment with the world. Though she follows her own moral code, Rodya tends to expect little from other people and has a strong understanding of just how many systems abuse innocent citizens with each passing day. I always think about it in the wheels of justice turn, a few people are going to get crushed in between the spokes. Or in the gears, I suppose is a better way of thinking about it. Rodya possesses a more solemn side shaped by her impoverished upbringing in the back streets. Having experienced the plights of the city's lower class firsthand, she's often the first, we see that all the time in the game, to comment on the wealth-based inequalities and tragedies encountered by the LCB, and there are plenty. as I have come to experience in making my own way through the game. In times like these, that's without all the mind-bending weirdness. Sometimes it's kind of hard to feel grounded, but it depends which wing you're in, I guess. In times like these, Rodia grows more deadpan and determined to be heard out, as her words become uncharacteristically dour. However, she rarely commits to her frustration in these moments, instead opting to break up the discussion with an excuse and a forced laugh or something more reminiscent of her usual demeanour. In reality, Rodia's easygoing disposition is largely an exaggeration, meant to help her avoid confronting her truer feelings. It's a mask, it's a thick skin, and she's unable to move on just yet. She struggles to let go of the guilt and regrets tying herself to her past, failing to recognise her present value as a highly worthy member of the LCB, relied on and appreciated for who she really is. Yeah, the struggle to let go, to pass on, to move on, and through adversity to ultimately purify oneself. This is really starting to become a theme already, and we're only 2 sinners in. Another facet of Rodion, front and centre in the book, and certainly touched upon in Limbus Company, is an obsession with the idea of being or becoming a superior being, a great man or woman who can enact change, regardless of who's sacrificed in the process. In Crime and Punishment, this idea is used by Dostoevsky to indict utilitarianism and socialism, but also the great man theory of history, in which certain individuals such as a Napoleon or a Muhammad, etc., and fans of the First French Empire or of, Islam, don't at me or whatever, I'm quoting Fyodor Dostoevsky here, can slay thousands for the good of tens of thousands with little to no compunction. Although Rodia is confronted about this fact by Porfiry around the sort of 2/3 of the way through the book. I've mentioned Sonya. Now, of course, those of you who've played through the game, which I assume is almost all of you, will know Sonya of the game, but who is Sonya in the book? So, Sofia Semyonovna Marmeladova, I'm sure I'm not quite pronouncing that quite correctly or putting the stresses on the right syllables, Marmeladova, is the daughter of a drunkard named Semyon Zakharovich Marmeladov, whom Raskolnikov meets in a tavern at the beginning of the novel. She's often characterized as, and this is a fairly neutral way of describing it, there are certainly feminist analyses which are a bit more critical of the way she's presented, but she is self-sacrificial, shy and innocent, despite being forced into prostitution to help her family. Raskolnikov discerns in her the same feelings of shame and alienation that he experiences, and she becomes the first person to whom he confesses his crime. Sensing his deep unhappiness, she supports him, even though she was friends with one of the victims, Lizaveta. Throughout the novel, Sonya is an important source of moral strength and rehabilitation for Raskolnikov. Because Dostoevsky's heroine remains so silent in the first parts of the novel, Sonya's struggle to reconcile the injustices she witnesses in the here and now with the belief in divine providence remains hidden from the reader until her conversation with Raskolnikov in the 4th part of the novel. Indeed, she herself has no chance to define her own moral dilemma before her father, Raskolnikov, and Luzin each take turns shaping their own images of her in order to fit her into their own stories. After finally emerging from their archetypal portrayals of her character, she defines her search for justice vis-à-vis Katerina Ivanovna and Raskolnikov in dialogue with the Lazarus story from the 11th chapter of John's Gospel. Like Lazarus's sisters, Sonya has difficulty accepting the suffering of a sibling as part of a divine plan, but still expresses great hope for a miracle. The example of Christ's resurrection of Lazarus from the dead encourages her to expect a similar miraculous intervention in her own story through the mediation of Raskolnikov, not unlike the way in which Dante mediates in the resurrection of the sinners. There's a tenuous connection, but I think some of these will become stronger as we get more episodes in. But her expectations are thwarted on the day after her Lazarus reading, when Pyotr Luzin threatens to destroy her and her family by falsely accusing her of stealing 100 rubles. In reacting to this test of faith, Sonya affirms a renewed belief in divine providence, for which she is rewarded, in accordance with the structure of a Christian resurrection tale, with a new life, provided for financially by Svidrigayev and spiritually by Raskolnikov. In Limbus Company, Sonya is explicitly revolutionary, likely in a way that Dostoevsky himself would not have approved of, I wonder, his spiritually conservative stance having coalesced following his return from exile. In fact, one aspect of Crime and Punishment is a repudiation of the ideas that were in the air in the 1860s, specifically utilitarianism, encouraging actions that lead to the greatest good for the greatest number of people, and socialism, to an extent. Whether he represented these ideas and movements fairly, or whether Crime and Punishment is basically a polemic against them, I suppose it could be both, is beyond the scope of this episode to examine. I will just mention, though, that Marx's Das Kapital would not be published until the year after Crime and Punishment came out, although Marx himself had been writing and engaged in politics for many years prior. Like Rodion, Sonya in the game is a more worldly figure. The fourth intervallo suggests that he has made impressive strides towards realizing the Eurodvia's goal of wealth equality by staying true to these methods. Despite this, Time Killing Time also paints a somewhat questionable image of Sonya. The members of his syndicate are shown to refer to him as a saint and look to him very highly, without any concern as to his intentions or methods, lending to a sort of a cult-like vibe. In contrast to his stated dream of the city's people longing to be equal. His interactions with Rodion in Canto 2 also come off as somewhat haughty, acting as if he were superior to her. Here, Sonya is dismissive of Rodion's own accounts and feelings, overwriting them with his own unshakable interpretation of the narrative. There's a petty and arrogant side to his personality which is further established by his decision to bring up her lack of the mark, and therefore incompetence, as soon as she started to get the best of him in their conversation, demonstrating that Sonya in the game is ultimately far from the perfect figure he presents himself as, not so much a hooker with a heart of gold. Dostoevsky's intense religious conviction is not so much a factor in Limbus Company, which expresses a more, I would say, esoteric form of spiritualism, and after all, it would be hard for a game with a religiously polemical viewpoint to attract a wide enough audience. In fact, it just occurred to me that a main, although thankfully not essential component of the game, is gambling related. So, perhaps Dostoevsky would have approved after all. Rodion's last name in the novel is, and I've mentioned it a bunch of times already without explanation, sorry about that, Raskolnikov. Now, Raskolnik is to split with an axe, say, or it could be a kind of a schism, further reinforcing the split personality of the novel. A little less than 200 years before the events of Crime and Punishment, liturgical and ritual reforms enacted by the Russian Orthodox Church caused widespread dissent, as well as social and religious upheaval. The schism, or split, was a raskol, and the addition of the nik suffix means that a Raskolnik could be a person associated with or causing such a split. That's where we get stuff like beatnik, peacenik, refusenik as loanwords in English. I guess they're not as common nowadays. There's something of like a Cold War relic. So yeah, Rodion's last name being Raskolnikov, one who splits, seems a bit on the nose to me. Or on top of the head, in the case of the pawnbroker. And the word Raskol is of course written on the head of Elsie, Rodion's axe. Rodion is sinner number 9. I thought it might be interesting, as we bring the discussion to a gentle, slow stop, to touch on the potential significance of this when it comes to the Tarot and Kabbalah systems, particularly the latter, from what I can see, that underpin much of the mystical elements, whether married to technology by the corpse or not, of Project Moon's games. A couple of points to note are that the number 9 in the major arcana, a tarot deck consists of 22 major arcana and 56 minor arcana, is the Hermit. If we take the major arcana as representing steps in a person's life, 9 tells us this. As a human progresses spiritually, they realize that God never turned away from them. They are never alone, and their most secret deeds and thoughts cannot be hidden. Quite relevant when it comes to crime and punishment. Therefore, it is important for them to examine their motives carefully. Can you ever justify taking another life, perhaps, whether you're a self-perceived Übermensch or not? Nietzsche will have to wait for another day. In times of loneliness and despair, when all seems dark, they need only raise their vision to see the Christ light pointing their way. Yod, tetragrammaton, equals vow. Principle equals triality, ding ding ding, and the expression equals spirit, transformer, universe, material, neutral. He, astrology, Aquarius. The vow value, working as a meditation on Yod He Vow He, which you'll partially recognize from some of the ego in Limbus Company, beyond as a way of spelling Yahweh, one of the names for the God of the book. We'll skip over that though, the meditation thing. And finally, He, once again, in the Sephirot, equals the triad of morality. All this stuff is associated with the Hermit card. So where does that leave us? Read the book if you can. I was really surprised and actually delighted at how affected I was in picking up a work, in translation, of course, mind you, from 160 years ago. If you're anything like me, you'll find Rodion initially exasperating, frightening, frustrating, and then increasingly intriguing and sympathetic. Svidrigayev is repellent, but sort of alluringly so, and in a different way than Luzin. They represent different aspects, body and mind, after all, as I touched on earlier. And Razumikhin, again, I'm sorry, Russian speakers, is absolutely delightful. He's like the best friend of Rodion in the book. And I really hope we get a version of them in Limbus Company. That'd be really cool. But Razumikhin is delightful, but a bit much, and Dunya is just awesome. So is Porfiry. I could go on. I would also ask you to consider, post today's episode, given the plethora of characters, viewpoints, philosophies, both confronting and affirming, and conflicts that we come across in Limbus Company, how do you reflect on these? And what do you believe at the end of it all? Are the sinners just doppel, or I guess zwölffach gangers? Because there's like 12 of them. Not including our manager. So are they just zwölffach gangers for our manager surrogate? Who are you excited to hear about next? And what have I missed out? A lot, Natch. Or what could I focus on more next time? I will freely admit, focus is not my strong suit, but I'll do my best. I can't wait to read Demian and grapple with Sinclair and Chroma. Honestly, I kind of thought he was a bit of a little wiener at first, but after Canto 3, I realise I shouldn't have judged a book by its cover. Well played, Project Moon. Well played. Good story stuff. Thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, this ramble, I hope you'll consider subscribing and sticking around. For the time being, I'm aiming to alternate Limbus Company character analyses every 2 to 3 weeks or so, with a work-in-progress live stream, and who knows what else. I realise that this episode took a while to come out. Without divulging too much, he says, preparing to probably divulge too much, it's been a tumultuous month for me, in a good way. I've taken on a couple of days a week at a bank, but the voiceover work is building up nicely too. I'm about to start my 3rd audiobook for Podium this year, and I have at least one more scheduled for September. I've also got a new set of demos being produced, and a big Skyrim mod that I play a major character in has just come out, and I've taken on an interim position as a conductor in a choir. But anyway, that's enough about me, and on reflection it does sound a bit up myself. Sorry. Let's keep barreling forward with idiosyncratic opinions on Project Moon properties. Episodes going forward will not take so long to produce, I promise. Before I sign off, I'll mention, at the risk of sounding like a stuck record, I think I'll keep a tighter rein on the copy and paste next episode, that I do all this myself, and therefore, liking, subscribing, commenting and rating wherever you happen to be listening or watching helps out the podcast/channel immensely. My thanks to those who do show their support, however that may manifest, whether it's a donation, a comment, a review, etc. Thank you. Stay tuned for more Limbus Company-related lore episodes, tales of classic horror, I swear some are on their way, and all sorts of other good things. With that, I will bid you good night and farewell for now. Take care. It's a scary world out there. Oh, bugger. Now, I still haven't gotten around to talking about casuistry. I said I was going to do it in the live stream, and I never did. And I swore when I started writing the script that I would, and I haven't. Well, there's always next time. Vroom, vroom.